I'm sad, everyone. I'm sad because there are things I'd love to tell you about, hobbies I wanted to try and explore, but I'm just super bad at them. Do you know how hard it is to do calligraphy while being left-handed? It's impossible! So, since I can't tell you much about it myself, I invited here someone who's really fantastic at it. Please welcome the former professor and current VTuber, author of one of the most interesting streams and videos out there, Almantas.
It's a pleasure to be here, Miss Oak. Thank you very much for having me on.
Of course! Thank you so much for visiting me in my studio. Please tell the viewers more about who you are and what you're doing.
Well, as mentioned, I am a former professor. That is not a bit. That was my actual professional career for some years. But nowadays, as mentioned, I mostly end up streaming, and my shift in focus has been pretty considerable. I was a sociologist specializing in media studies, but nowadays I actually mostly do ancient history, and it's really become I've turned into very much an old man who just keeps on reading like Roman economics and military history. It's very stereotypical of me.
I need to say, calligraphy sounds like something very on brand for a professor. How did fancy writing become your hobby?
So, the story between me being a professor and fancy writing as a hobby, those are actually interlinked. I picked up calligraphy while I was in graduate school. I was taking an enormous amount of notes for graduate school. I mean, pages and pages per day. I filled up many, many books with lecture notes. And I just kind of decided one day that if I'm going to be taking this many notes, I may as well make my headers and titles for my notes look nice. So I picked up a very cheap calligraphy pen that was at the campus bookstore, and I started teaching myself. I looked up some online guides and practiced a little bit at home. And most of my initial practice was writing, name of classroom, the date of that I was taking it, and then that was the calligraphy that I would write just at the top of a page of notebook paper.
Do you have any specific styles of writing? Or should I call it something else? Types? Fonts?
So, as you might expect for a art form that is hundreds, arguably thousands of years old, there's a lot of terminology, right? And so the terminology for how you write is a script, is the main one. That is a script. I mostly write in Gothic these days, though some of the Gothic derivatives like Bastard Secretary I really like. I also will write in Insular, which is named for the country of Ireland, and so if you've seen Insular script, you almost certainly have, it immediately evokes this sense of Ireland. And that's because that was a script that was made famous by Irish monks during the 600s and 700s after the Carolinian Renaissance. And so those are the scripts I tend to write in. Like I said, Gothic, I write in the most frequently. It's very popular. It's a crowd pleaser. It's also very challenging, which I have grown to appreciate as I've gotten further along. But Bastard Secretary is probably my favorite. It is worth saying that all of the scripts that I write in are what are known as broad, as opposed to pointed. That because that all of the letters have, the only way to vary the width of the script is by rotating the pen rather than by pressing harder. Pointed scripts, you can change the width by pressing harder on the pen, and that's to do with the type of tool that you use.
Speaking of tools, which one is your favorite? I saw people doing amazing things with basic Sharpie, but not gonna lie, I think the glass pens are most impressive. And the most difficult to use, I presume? They sure look fancy though.
So, as I said, thank you for this question. As I said, I write with broad nibs. My favorite broad nib are, I really settled in on Pilot Parallels. They're about $15. They're fountain pens, and they take fountain pen ink, which is very good because the company that makes them, Pilot, which you might know from like the Pilot gel pens, they also make a lot of very good fountain pen inks under the brand name Roshizoku. And so having the ability to use lots of different fountain pen inks and to have this pen that is inked up for at least several pages worth of writing, and that travels very easily without having to carry the rest of your kit. Very, very useful. Very, very useful. So I've really settled on the Pilot Parallel, the 2.4 millimeter and 3.8s in particular, as my favorite tools to work with. I don't usually work with dips very often, with dip nibs very often. Those are kind of the more professional way to do things, but I don't use them very often just because of convenience and because I don't really own a lot of inks that are appropriate for dips. I also have done a fair amount with brush. I did learn a long time ago some sholdal, Japanese style calligraphy, and so I do have an affection for working with brushes and brush pens. I haven't really worked with glass nibs. They're very cool. They are very, very cool, but I honestly tend to be kind of rough on all of my things. I break my stuff a lot. I don't think I've really broken any of my calligraphy supplies particularly, but I am a person who, I break my glasses, I break my laptops, I've broken beds, I tend to break things pretty easily, so glass pens freak me out a little bit, so I haven't really played around with them. But like I said, I like these broad nibs, right, where it's a fixed width to the nib, like it's a reed stylus or even a feather quill that you pull down and they keep their shape as you pull.
Are there any tools and techniques you would recommend to left-handed people? Asking for a friend.
Well, unfortunately, I am not a member of the honored clan of left-handed people, so my knowledge of this is secondhand rather than personal experience. I am very much a right-handed person. My understanding from having talked to a handful of people who are left-handed calligraphers is that there's a couple of factors that really matter for working left-handed. One factor is using faster drying inks than a right-handed person might be able to count on. The black ink that I have been using recently, Sailor Black, is extremely wet. I have to worry about smearing it all the time working with it as a right-handed person, so that would, I think, be a very inappropriate one. But gouache, and there are some faster drying inks, would work, and brush inks tend to work somewhat better. I have also heard from some left-handed person that if you are writing with a pen, you want to make sure that when you're left-hand writing, this is to say, you want to really make sure that you keep your entire hand below the line that you're writing on, below the bottom line. And I've even heard a left-handed person say that this actually makes it easier. This is actually an advantage for getting proper and consistent letter forms. That the lefties are actually an advantage over the righties on certain letter forms because of this. And for brush, you want to do it the opposite way. For when you're working with brush, you want the bulk of your hand up to the wrist to be over the top line, so that you are, curling around the letter. That appears to be the techniques that the lefties like to use. I cannot vouch for them myself. This is what I've gotten from talking to some left-handed calligraphers. But there are professional left-handed calligraphers. It is not a insurmountable obstacle.
Would you say calligraphy is an accessible hobby? Are there any hard-to-acquire items or expensive elements? What would be good for starters?
I would say that calligraphy is an accessible hobby, to be honest. I think it's quite cheap as my hobbies go. Certainly compared to miniatures painting or gaming, it's quite a bit cheaper. The most important tool is a pen, and while you can get cheaper pens, I think that just from an ease of access standpoint, you may as well just jump in and get a Pilot Parallel 3.8 millimeter, and those are like $10 to $15, depending on where you find them, and it comes with ink. $10 to $15 comes with enough ink to get your toes wet. That's a pretty low expense. And then for the paper, you can work with printer paper. Printer paper is generally heavy enough to tolerate calligraphy. I've done it quite a bit in my time. It does tend to be a little bit over-absorbent, and it will create some feathering and bleeding effects that might be undesirable. You can reduce some of that by writing on top of a soft and absorbent surface, such as a couple of layers of newsprint, or even just a couple of layers of more disposable paper, including just more printer paper. And that's really it. That's legitimately it. It's quite a cheap hobby as these things go. And you could, in theory, start with, like a dip pen, but that creates additional... That is going to be cheaper on the initial sticker shock, but because you need to buy separate ink, and you'll need to buy an ink well, and you'll need to have a space that is set up for dip, and dip has a slightly trickier technique, I think that's actually a little bit harder of a start. I think that just starting in with a pilot is a very good way to start. I do recommend starting with larger nibs. 3.8 is on the larger side. That's relatively large. You will burn through a piece of paper pretty quickly. But the larger the nibs, the easier it is to see where you're making mistakes, which is very important for telling what to do. For telling how you are going to improve, and to telling where you made mistakes. I think it's very, very valuable to do that. And in general, smaller nibs are kind of harder to control. So I recommend starting with a big nib and a cheap pilot parallel. And like I said, printer paper is good. If the printer paper is giving you too much feathering, honestly, index cards. Index cards will handle it better as a rule. So you don't need anything particularly fancy. If you want to get fancier paper, you can, but you may as well practice on the cheap stuff. I still write on cheap paper primarily, because 90% of your work is going to just be practice, practice, practice. You don't actually spend that much time on making finished products. It is all in practice and drafting and practice and correcting and practice.
And how about learning all those beautiful writing styles? Are there any free tutorials? Where could a newbie find any step-by-steps?
As for free tutorials, there's quite a few free tutorials on YouTube. I cannot speak for their quality or utility, because I am very much a learning from books guy. I learned from The Art of Calligraphy, which I bought many years ago and has served me very, very well. And there are quite a few online guidelines. I would say the best place to start is probably the subreddit /r/calligraphy. Their wiki and beginner's guide are very good. Their wiki and beginner's guide will point you in a lot of very good directions. I think that's they've got a couple of pretty good examples there. I will also say that for starting, just as kind of an aside, I would recommend against starting with Gothic specifically. Gothic is a somewhat more challenging script where very small mistakes feel very magnified, because it really expects to do a lot of long, straight lines, and keeping those in hand can be quite a bit more frustrating than, because it's very unnatural, right? It's very unnatural to do these rotations. Your wrists and your fingers do rotation and twisting, and to make straight lines out of a series of rotations and twists is actually quite annoying to do. It is, I think, much easier and much more natural to learn foundational or Carolinian or Italic. Are all much more natural to learn as a start point, and then learn Gothic when those start to feel either comfortable or kind of boring to you.
Lastly, who would this hobby be best for? What do you think?
So to me, I can only really speak about why I feel like it suits me in particular, and you might think, you the audience might think about why and how you might be similar to me, and how this might make sense to you. I'm a very letters and writing focused person. That is what I love and what I focus on. I do not know how to draw. I have never particularly had any interest in drawing, video editing, almost any other visual art. I love writing, I love letter forms, and I love history. And it is a very abstract art form, right? The connection between a word and the thing that it represents is very arbitrary. And so anything that you are doing with writing is intrinsically going to be a deeply abstract art form. So if you're a person who thinks very abstractly about the world rather than more representationally, this might be more of a draw for you than learning how to draw physical objects out in the world, which I have never had much success or interest in. There is overlap. If you do know how to draw, there is definitely an overlap in terms of having, brush and pen and finger control. Those things are related, and you'll be familiar with the materials and possibly even the tools, though I don't know that for a fact. But the way that you think about it is very, very different. And for me, it's been very, very good on that front. It's also been a very enlightening art form for me as a person with such a keen and strong interest in history, that this is an art form that is practiced today much the same way that it has been practiced for hundreds and hundreds of years. You can learn how to write in ancient Roman scripts, and this was a full career path that probably quite a few of my ancestors did for a significant chunk of human history. And this allows you to feel really connected to those works and those lifestyles, not just to be able to look at a medieval manuscript and feel a sense of familiarity and coherence to it. That you'll look at it and you will go, oh, I understand what they did there. I understand why they did these things. I understand what this thing is doing on the page and why it's there. Even if you don't speak Latin. I don't speak Latin. I am, but it will also give you a deep sense, in a way that only reenactors tend to get, a deep sense of connection with what those lifestyles and works were like. Just reading accounts of what it was like to be a scribe will not give you that very internal, qualitative feel for what those people were doing and how it felt and who they were. And I think that there's something really truly valuable to that. I don't know how much there are deeper physical and mental requirements. I think that there's definitely a bias towards certain mental states. Like I said, I am a very patient person. I am a person who likes being connected to the past. I'm a very abstract thinker. All of these things make calligraphy feel very right and natural for me to engage with. A certain amount of motor control is very helpful if you have essential tremor or other neurological issues that prevent you from keeping your fingers and hands steady. That might make this a very frustrating hobby. I don't want to speak to your particular experiences, but I am afraid to say that might hurt your abilities to enjoy it. But other than that, it's quite a low barrier to entry. It's quite a low barrier to entry as hobbies go.
I learned a lot today. Thank you so much for sharing all that knowledge and tips. Please, tell us where we can find you to learn more, not only about the calligraphy.
Well, I am Almantas VT on all of my socials. I am by far and away the most active on twitch.tv. Aside from that, I'm relatively active on Blue Sky and Goodreads, where I'm, once again, Almantas VT. I do have a Twitter, an Instagram, and a TikTok, but I don't really use them very much. And so those are probably the places where you can learn the most about me. I stream pretty regularly, almost always 4 p.m. US Eastern on most weekdays. I tend to take Wednesdays off. But usually Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, I'm streaming at 4 p.m. US Eastern for a couple of hours, where I will stream. Calligraphy is the most common, but, miniatures, painting. I stream some video games periodically. I like to do talk shows, particularly to interview people about books that they've been reading. And those are the main places that you can find me.
Once again, thank you so much.
And thank you so much for having me on, Miss Oak. It was a real pleasure, and I'm really glad that I got to share this wonderful and ancient art form with people. And hopefully a couple of people here even if you don't get really into it, you at least try it out, see what it's like, and learn a few things about yourself and the past and the connections that we all share through these wonderful art forms. Thank you so much.
And to add to that, Western calligraphy is amazing, as well as the history around the scripts. But if you like to see how written words became art, not only by the right of looking fancy, but also by creating something unique as a whole, consider looking at Arabic calligraphy art, Chinese creative calligraphy, and more cozy things like Japanese etagami. The world is full of inspiration, all you need to do is to create. Thank you for watching this video. I hope that you enjoy spring spinning as much as I do. I love to learn new things and I love to see how other people approach creative expression. Also, remember that I have a playlist for all of the spring spinning and crafty videos. You can find it on the main page of my channel. Please consider subscribing and tell me in the comments what your creative expression looks like. That is all for today. See you next week and bye bye!